Hi, this is Jay Schuberg, and I'm going to be talking about what makes a great clinical medical student. The goal of this presentation is really for students in their first and second year who are preparing for the clinical rotations to have some idea about what they're entering into and what might some program directors be looking for. So just as a matter of context, I think it's always important when you hear recommendations to kind of know what perspective they're coming from. And as a disclosure, I think it's important for you to know that I've actually not worked in the Toro clinical system. I'm relatively new to Toro, and I've not worked at the Toro Clinical Hospital. So there may be things that are unique to your experience that are not covered in this presentation. However, I do have more than 25 years of medical education experience. I've taught students at all different levels, from preclinical to clinical. I've also served as a residency director and a fellowship director, and looked at hundreds, if not 1,000 students' applications to determine who are the best students for our programs. So I have certainly a fair amount of experience with that. So I know that you've been working in the classroom, you've been largely studying with textbooks and your notes, and maybe by yourself in small groups, but the environment's entirely different in your clinical rotations. And you're going to see that each rotation has a personality. It might be that if you're working in an outpatient setting that you get up and you start rotations at 8 a.m. with patients. You'll be seeing them till lunch, then take a lunch break, and then you'll see patients again in the afternoon till 5. However, some preceptors will actually have a hospital service as well. So it might be that they get up in the morning, make rounds in the hospital, go to the clinic, take break for lunch, or maybe go back to the hospital, see patients in the afternoon, and maybe go back to the hospital again in the evening. So be prepared that each schedule will be a little bit different. You might also find that on hospital-based rotations, you'll have long periods of time where you're on your own in the hospital. So depending upon the number of patients on your service, the number of house staff in your service, you might make rounds in the 7 in the morning till 9:30, then you might be on your own till 4 o'clock in the afternoon. This largely will depend upon who you're working with. And so sometimes you'll be on your own and you'll have to kind of do some self-directed learning. Sometimes you'll have a resident or other more senior students who will kind of give assignments. And your experience will be largely dependent upon who you're working with. And then I think the other thing is, remember that you are an active contributor to this. I think you want to show that you're engaged, involved, and you want to learn. If you check out, the service will be happy to check you out and not engage you, but that will affect your learning experience and, of course, your evaluation. A word about timing. So currently you guys have class usually from 8 till 3, maybe 8 till 5. You may have some free time in there. But most rotations go by the assumption that you're working from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. So those are your new hours. It might be some outpatient services work 8 to 5. It might be other services that have you come in even earlier. So just know that your schedule will be different. And if you get breaks of time, you're going to want to be able to take care of some of your kind of business work hour needs when you get a chance, because there may be less of a chance to get those things done. And then a fair amount of services also may require you to be on call. That might mean be on call at night. It could be every other weekend. So your hours will probably be a bit more heavy in direct service time. And then faculty assumptions. I share these not because they're best practices or even that they're fair, but there are things that many students experience. So all of us who teach, and probably all of us together, always assume that our rotation must be the best rotation. But of course that cannot be. But that doesn't mean we don't believe it. And sadly to say, we often assume that when you're not with us, maybe you're not working. And so this is an important thing that you want to try to get over and make sure that you share with your preceptors what you're doing when you're not with us, so that they know that. And then, of course, we all assume that our practices are best practices and that we must be practicing the best form of medicine. And, of course, that can't be true. So recognize that when you're with a provider, you're going to learn as many things about what you don't want to do as much as you do want to do. And then remember that most of our faculty are volunteer faculty or only partially compensated. And so students typically add time to our day, and I typically say that every student adds at least 1 hour to my day. And so there is a commitment that we're making to this, and we want to see that you're engaged and participating to make this worth our while and your while. So what can you do as a thriving young student who wants to do their best in the rotation? So I think the first thing you want to do is make sure you contact your preceptor, the preceptor's office, the week before you start rotating to confirm where and when you should be on the first day. Yeah, as I mentioned, every preceptor has a different schedule. That schedule might vary day to day, and you don't want to be left sitting somewhere waiting for your preceptor when you could have met them at the alternative site. I think it's also worthwhile to see if the preceptor is willing to meet with you in advance to discuss schedules and expectations. This may not always be possible, but it does show a prepared student who wants to know what to do in advance. And then I think also, if the preceptor is willing to provide in advance about recommended readings, this gives you a chance to get a head start. Now, you're going to get a wide variation of responses to this, but that doesn't diminish the likelihood that you show that you are prepared and ready for the rotation. And then I actually suggest strongly that on the first day of the rotation, or the first time you meet with your preceptor, that you bring a schedule for the month. This shows when you're with the provider, shows when you have other responsibilities, including school responsibilities like a COMAT exam, or when you have personal responsibilities such as a medical appointment. And if I'm a preceptor and you show this to me in advance, I'm way more likely to understand why this would be important and be certainly understanding of it. But if you're working with me today and then at 5:30 tonight you say, oh, by the way, tomorrow morning I can't be here, I have an appointment, this disrupts my flow and it may even disrupt my plans. And so I think it's not nearly as beneficial than presenting this in advance and again showing your organization. When you're working with a preceptor, every preceptor is going to be different about how they want to interface with you. So I think it's worthwhile to ask the preceptor, when would you like me to ask questions? Would you like me to ask in the room, or would you want me to wait between patients, or do you want me to wait till the end of the day? What are their expectations for you? Do you want them to, does the preceptor want you to do reading every day, present something, or even mechanics? So for example, when I have students with me, I expect the students always to sit in the room. When you stand in the room, it changes the patient perception of time in the room. And so I usually will tell my students that I want you to sit. You can ask me questions. You can ask the patient questions at any time. I can ask you questions anytime. And it's okay not to know. And then preceptors may or may not ask you about your goals. So I think it's important to be prepared for that. You can certainly be proactive and share with your preceptor what your goals are. But again, you'll get varied acceptance. But I think that many preceptors do want to know what your goals are for that. And then finally, another mechanical question is, when you're working with patients or maybe you're in separate rooms, where do they want you to wait for the preceptor, and how do you want to engage with staff? So some preceptors will ask you to go ahead and ask the staff for supplemental information. Other ones will say always go to them first. So learning the mechanics of the rotation is going to save you from some stumbles during the rotation. And then in terms of record keeping, I do recommend you keep a list of the patients seen. You don't have to keep identification of their names, but you can say, gender, age, and then their medical problems. And then this allows you to keep learning topics. It allows you to keep logs and allows you to know what you've been doing so that you can kind of see where the strengths are in your rotation. Many of you have heard me say this. I believe strongly that every student should read one article per day, every day, and that when you do this, it allows you to be more efficient and more effective in the gaining of knowledge. So while you're a preclinical student and certainly early in clinical years, I think the American Family Physician is an excellent journal for everyone because it only publishes evidence-based short reviews. So you could very easily get through this article in about 15, 20 minutes, and you're going to gain a knowledge topic. It's my opinion that I can tell on the end of the fourth year what students have read an article per day and which ones have not. I think their knowledge is significantly better, and you can see that. Now, when you're in clinical rotations, you may get assignments from your clinical preceptor, and you may even want to ask them, what do they recommend for references? Sometimes they'll give you a textbook, sometimes they'll give you articles, and sometimes they'll say topics. Now, one of the things that you've probably heard at length is that you're going to be asked a lot of questions. You can call that pimping. You can get, you can call that, being asked questions in rotation. But it's always okay to say you don't know, and it's much better to say you don't know than to make up an answer. However, I would not recommend that you say I don't know twice on the same topic. So it is expected by myself and many other preceptors that if there's a topic you don't know about, if I've asked, it must be important, and then I expect you to look that topic up so that the next time I ask you, you'll be able to know. This is another reason why you want to keep this list of learning topics, so you can circle the ones that you need to kind of highlight. And then certainly on certain rotations like surgery, you might get long periods of breaks in the middle of the day. What a great time to do some of your supplemental reading or charting if you've not completed it. And then the rules of engagement. Well, this will largely depend upon who is on the rotation. So, like I mentioned earlier, ask your attending, how would they like to be addressed in terms of questions, things like that. You always want to default to the most formal setting you can unless you're told otherwise. I generally feel like you should always be as well dressed as your preceptor or better. And if the attending refers you to the office manager, they or the certified medical assistant, they may be key. So trying to figure out what are the key things I need to know on this rotation. Also, don't be afraid to ask questions when you're with a patient, but make sure that the preceptor is okay with it. And then, of course, you're going to want to be kind and considerate, not only to the patients, the preceptor, but also to the staff. Being disrespectful to the staff certainly gets communicated back to the preceptor and can often affect your learning experience and affect your evaluation. When you're in a hospital rotation, typically the senior-most person rules the service. It's often a resident. They typically will take the number of people in the service, divide the service up so that you each have a smaller assignment of patients. And then you'll often make rounds, report to the resident first, and then make grand rounds with the attending where everyone is together. Make sure that you know that residents often contribute to your evaluation, and so you want to treat them as an extension of your preceptor. And they can often be a really great resource to help you understand things that you're struggling with, understand key topics, and that many residents will often do some teaching during the day between patients. So you're going to see that there are many different ways that your attending will interact with you. Some attendings will not ask a lot of questions, others will ask incessantly. I know that I will typically ask questions of my students until they don't know. And that what I do that for is I really want to see the limits of their knowledge so then I can extend that. So if there's a topic you know and you respond, it's great. And I may ask you another question. Don't see that as a sad thing. See that as, I'm going to have to go further to extend the length of your knowledge. Often the mechanics are such that we'll ask the junior-most person a question and work our way up to the senior-most person. So please be respectful. Let the junior-most person answer. If you can see a student who's junior to you is struggling, you certainly can help them later, but you want to give everyone a chance to be able to participate in the question and answer period during rounds. What to carry and what to wear. So certainly, I think you've heard very extensively that you want to wear professional dress. I feel like you always want to dress as good as or better than your preceptor. You always want to have something to take notes. I would recommend that you have a calculator. Often you have to calculate things. And then whatever reference that you use, so many of your references are available on the phone now, that it makes carrying things quite a bit easy. I do think anytime you access your phone, if you're doing it in the room with a patient or with a preceptor, let them know what you're doing. I think that just being respectful to let them know you're not texting, you're not making a call, you're indeed looking up something to benefit the patient. I also feel that it's important to bring snacks. I like to always have food, so I don't always know when I'm going to eat next, and so I have an abundance mentality in most of my life, but I seem to have a scarcity mentality with food, and so I always make sure I bring food. You do not want to take phone calls while you're on rotation. You do not want to text while you're on rotation. When you're doing those things, especially if you're not announcing it and if it's not related to your rotation, that tells me you're not engaged. There's no quicker way to have a preceptor or even a patient check out from your work if they see that you're not engaged in the work to be done at the time. And as I mentioned, if you pull your phone out, let the patient or the provider know what you're doing. So feedback. Feedback is one of the most important things that you can get to advance yourself as a physician. Rarely do I find that the evaluations are objective enough to give me good feedback so I feel like I can grow. They tend to be just check boxes. So I find that you're going to want to ask your preceptor for feedback. And I don't like to wait till the very end. I might wait at the end of the very first week and say, well, now my first week is done. How do you think I'm doing? And is there anything I should be adjusting? This allows the preceptor, if they're willing, to give you feedback about your technique, your methods, or even interpersonally, things they like or don't like. And of course, be prepared for that feedback so that you can make adjustments. If there's no response at the end of the first week, you could try it midway, and then of course you're going to ask for it again at the end. And I think it's okay to say that you want to be an excellent student. What can you do to make this improved? Not that you're just asking for positive feedback. Often other critical feedback will come unsolicited. And then of course take your feedback into context and make sure it makes sense based upon what you've asked for. I also think that the evaluation at the end of the rotation, that you should try to do that with your preceptor at the time. We're all very busy, and if you finish the rotation and don't trigger us to do the evaluation, it might be weeks or even longer before we do it. And again, the quality of the rotation surely goes down as time passes, just like the quality of your charts would go down as time passes. Remember that every rotation you're going to learn something. No matter what they assign you, no matter how much you like it or don't like it, you're going to learn something. And sometimes those lessons are less obvious. My last family medicine rotation in my residency, I was working with what I thought was a very respected family physician who was quite tough. And I remember him sitting me down on the first day and said, you're not going to see patients with me during this rotation. And I was kind of surprised. And I said, why is that? And he said, I feel like you know what you need to know for family medicine. I don't feel like there's things to add. I want you to learn some things maybe you haven't learned. So for the first week, he put me in the front office, and I got to see how the front office works. And then the middle 2 weeks, I worked with billing and coding. And so I actually got to do a lot of the billing and coding and got quite good at it. And then on the last week, I worked with the checkout desk. And so this was actually a really great experience for me to have an opportunity to work with parts of medicine that I would not normally be able to work with. And I was very grateful for that afterwards. I would also say that, my first oncology rotation, I was considering oncology, and I was working with a preceptor who worked with medicine very different than I. And in fact, it made me think I would not want to do oncology. And remember that your preceptor has a big impact on your rotation, but every preceptor is different. And so I actually had a different oncology rotation as a resident and made me love oncology as a specialty. So just know that just because you had a rotation that wasn't your favorite, this may not just be the topic, it might also be the preceptor. And then fatigue. Boy, for a lot of people, they feel like they're starting all over again when they're doing clinical rotations. You felt like you knew a lot, you were all set for boards, and now you have to start with clinical knowledge. And quite honestly, I feel like you could get more clinical knowledge in the first 2 years. There's no room for it. So many people feel like they're starting over when they do rotations and like, what did I learn for 2 years? I can tell you that students that work with us commonly cap out about 3 o'clock. So they're learning, they're interacting all morning. By lunch, they start to get a little bit tired. They feel refreshed in the beginning of the afternoon, but by 3 o'clock, they have the 3 o'clock stare. And it's clear that whatever I'm asking, some of it's bouncing back, but not much is going in. So I usually will have to kind of adjust a bit. I may continue to see patients, they may see less, so that they can start to catch up with the things that they've been shared with. Know that quality is as good as quantity. So some students want to see every single patient, but if you see every single patient, you're going to get less time with each patient. On some rotations, you might find that seeing 5 patients a day, beginning to know them depthly, might be as good as seeing 20 patients a day. And then certainly make sure you take care of yourself, make sure you get sleep, make sure that you eat regularly, Make sure that you do something for yourself on your time off, because there is always more work to be done. And being tired, and when you're on call, being tired is not desirable, because when you're on call, we expect you to be sharp, just like you are in the daytime, serving as the night team. Then how to study. Certainly you're going to have to find ways to assimilate material from your rotations into your knowledge base. I like to use a page a disease, so I have a notebook at which I feel like I should be able to write everything I need to know about the disease on a single page. That usually requires multiple writings, but I do that particularly for services that I like less or things I know less. So I did that a lot for surgery and for OB-GYN. So I had a good working knowledge of kind of key components. And then certainly many of your preceptors will be open to doing mini presentations. This is a good opportunity to see how you organize and present material, and it gives you a chance to get feedback from your preceptors. And then I always recommend carrying something to read, whether it's the American Family Physician, something from your phone, but being able to capture reading time during breaks during the day, but also overnight or during lunch if it's slow. And then at the end of your rotation, make sure that you thank the preceptor. I think make sure you thank the staff. I actually think it's rather nice to send a thank you note back to the office or the attending, thanking them for their time working with you, maybe highlighting one or two things that you learned. Ideally, you would have already done the evaluation with them by then. That's not always the case. And then, if this is a preceptor you feel that you want a letter, and I would ask, do you feel like you could write me a positive or a solid letter? I would actually ask as soon as possible, because the longer you go from your rotation before you ask, the less likely I'm going to remember the specific details. And so it's important to try to ask that up front and say, would you be willing to do that? And then work with them regarding their kind of parameters in terms of the letter. So I hope this was useful for you. These are some things that I've shared with students clinically. I think the highlights would be make sure you're prepared. Make sure you bring a calendar to the first day outlining your month so that you've said where you'll be and where you won't be. Be ready to actively learn. Know that we all assume that our rotation is best. Make sure you bring your calendar to the first day. Make sure you don't use your phone for anything other than assisting your patient care while you're with patients and preceptors. Make sure that you dress appropriately and are aggressive with, or at least upfront about asking for feedback early in the rotation, at the end of the rotation, and providing a letter. I hope this is useful. I hope you have a great day, and good luck with your rotations.